Kia ora, my name is J.D. Evans. Let's read a book. This is The Carbonite's Daughter by Deryn Pittar. The Carbonite's Daughter is a dystopian YA fiction, and Deryn Pittar is a Aotearoa author. So starting as usual with a big thanks to Deryn for allowing me to read this book on the channel. To lead or to breed? Callista has this choice, but before she can make a decision, she needs to leave the protection of the tunnels and chance her life outside, where radiation kills and people wither. So she is told. Who can she believe? Her father or the MI6's men in charge? Fear battles with her desire for adventure, and if she stays, another insemination looms. Set in dystopian New Zealand post a nuclear dawn, this is a story of growth and discovery, and the realization that things aren't always as they seem. Chapter 1. Callista kept a tight grasp of her mother's hand as they hurried down the sloping passage, deeper into the mountain. Each footfall made her small breasts bounce and tingle. They hurt, and she wished she had enough boobs to wear a bra. She probably would soon. The walls were warm, and her heavy coat made her hot. She wanted to stop and take it off, but they had a train to catch. "When will we see Father?" Her mother stopped and put her arm around Callista's shoulders, whispering into her ear. "Shh. Remember, the walls are listening." Callista looked around. No microphones in sight, but they could be hidden. She looked into her mother's dark brown eyes, her Welsh heritage, and her mother often told her, and noticed more grey hairs around her temple. She looked older. The sodium lights in the passageway picked out the fine lines around her eyes. Why hasn't she noticed this before? The excitement of the last month blinded her to the everyday things. She had not seen her father for 2 years, and today she might. She whispered back, "When, Mother?" Mother checked her timepiece, an old fob watch from Callista's many times great-grandfather. She closed the lid and rubbed her fingers over the smooth, silver case. It's been promised to Callista when her mother dies. Hugging her again, she murmured, "Your father is hoping to get on the train at Mount Aotearoa station. The police are looking for him, so we have to be very careful not to acknowledge him until we are safe in Queenstown. He will find us there." Callista nodded. A swell of excitement filled her at the thought of seeing him again. "Now, hush with your questions. We have to hurry." Mother took Callista's hand, her palm soft and smooth from spinning wool, and together they ran along the passage, ever deeper into the dark, coal-lined tunnel. Their footsteps echoed off the hard rock floor. They would probably be the last to arrive. They reached the turnstile at the station, breathless and hot, and handed their passes to a grumpy-looking guard. He scanned their tickets with his electronic wand, staring at Callista until she blushed before he let them through. Many people mingled on the platform waiting for the train. She looked around. There were other girls there, accompanied by a parent and a few boys. The boys were tall and kind of handsome, and looked as if they had spent hours keeping fit, which they probably did if they were breeders. There were no familiar faces. Everyone was catching the Westport to Queenstown train, underground most of the way. Queenstown and the Remarkables range were under a synthetic dome, and it was the only place anyone could go to get sunshine. Their bones would weaken without vitamin D. Those lucky enough to be classified as prime breeders, like her, could go for a month's holiday. At 12 years of age she needed supervision, so her mother could travel with her. The mountain ranges were riddled with coal. It saved them from the nuclear dawn, and water was plentiful from snowmelt and underground rivers. Water and coal powered the steam trains that carry the survivors of the 2150 nuclear war up and down the spine of the South Island, deep inside the Southern Alps. At school, they learned about the nuclear dawn. There were lots of history lessons. All those religious fanatics finally got their hands on enough plutonium and nuclear waste to make a bomb or two and explode them. Matched by the nuclear missiles from the bombed countries, the whole earth seared. How lucky they were to live in New Zealand, as far away as possible from the destruction. The population here had enough warning to go underground into the shelters, with barely 5 years to construct the underground gardens and dig more living areas. Some didn't want to come in, and some couldn't. They missed out in the ballot, and the history lessons tell that the remaining population outside will have all died from radiation. By connecting all the mining tunnels that riddled the Southern Alps, a vast underground railway system was made. Callista will get to ride a steam train for the first time. Coal had become their savior. God bless coal, God bless water, and God bless steam engines. It's a litany the children and tunnelers said every day. Coal heated the water to warm the gardens and the sleeping units. It fueled the trains that are the only means of travel. Once, they are told, people flew between countries. No one did that anymore. Only a few boats remained, and they sailed between islands and to Australia, looking for survivors to increase the gene pool. Mother said that sometimes underground living drove people crazy, and she guessed her mother meant Daddy. He was one of the Carbonites. They worship coal because all things in life contain carbon, but coal has the most. While they waited for the train, Callista thought about her father, but she turned away so Mother couldn't see the tears on her cheeks. As much as she loved him, she wished he'd just give up all this carbon worship and be her father again. He ran the water plant for their whole subterranean town before he got religion. The Carbonites don't want the coal in the mountains to be mined. They worship it as a sacred artifact, a part of God. In class they were taught that the Carbonites destroyed the heat-exchanging plants and blew up the internal aqueduct, and accused the tunnelers of using the last pure carbon deposits available to man. If they were caught by the police, they were digitally marked and thrown out of the haven areas. This punishment is as good as a death sentence, but they sometimes survived outside for years. The teachers said if the Carbonites ever returned, the implants would trigger alarms at the portals, and once caught, they'd be thrown out into the nuclear wasteland again. Eventually, the radiation will kill them. The thought of her father suffering so much distressed her, and through tear-blurred eyes she saw their train arrive. A long, fat cloud of steam trailed behind the shiny black engine. It puffed to a stop, its brakes hissing. A bright red number 586 gleamed on the center front of the engine. It filled Callista with a feeling of kinship. It was a beautiful machine, its shiny steel body painted black, and its brass pistons glimmered under the station's light. It looked like a living thing, a black dragon, hissing and huffing steam, something out of a storybook. She didn't know trains had numbers, just like her, except hers was tattooed between her shoulder blades and only visible in a mirror. Because it's still healing, it itched her terribly. A man did it on her last visit to the clinic. She was relieved they didn't put it on her chest. It would be awful to look at it every day, and some of the girls thought having a number is something to be proud of. They found their cabin and took seats against the window, facing each other. Mother put her bag on the floor between her feet. It had food and extra clothing. They'd get plenty at the health spa, but Mother hoped she could give some to Daddy if he made it. There was little to see through the windows, only the black tunnel walls, except when the train travelled through clear cocoons as it crossed rivers and the young glaciers. That was when she got her first look at the outside world, preparing her for the beauty of Queenstown. Mother had told her how breathtaking it was. Her parents went there for their honeymoon because Daddy had such a respected position. Lake Wakatipu is where the rich people played, under the domed sky. Not that many rich people were left. They died like everyone else. Mother said being alive is richness in itself. It had been an early rising and a rush to get there. The rocking of the train and clickety-clack as it ran over the joints in the tracks made her eyelids heavy. Callista struggled to stay awake, to see the outside world when they passed through the cocoons, but her eyes refused to stay open. She awakened later and saw by her wristband that she'd slept for 2 hours, and her heart sank, knowing she's missed the first cocoon views. Her mother was reading opposite her, and they exchanged smiles. Callista made her excuses and pushed past other passengers in their cabin, stepping over their legs and luggage. Those without carriage tickets lined the hallways, a warm mass of people, standing in a fug of unpleasant odor. Crying children looked grubby and tired. Mothers made soothing noises and looked weary. She smothered the sharp stab of guilt that pierced her because as a prime breeder she had a seat and they didn't. The need to find the relief facilities was urgent. A guard stopped her and checked her ticket. It was on the information chip in her upper arm, where their settlement details were kept. "First trip, young lady." The guard in his silver uniform with black flashes on the sleeve made her heart beat faster. He reminded Callista of the doctors in the assessment clinic who probed and prodded, took blood samples, scanned her body, and declared her fit to breed. She'd have to return when her periods arrived, and that thought made her stomach clench. But Mother said having children was a blessing, and she shouldn't be afraid. She would be there to help her, but first she needed to build up her vitamin D intake. "Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to my holiday." "Do you have your family with you?" "Just my mother." Her heart tripped a little as he scanned her arm with his light reader. Do you know where your father is?" Mother warned her about trick questions from guards and doctors. "No, sir. I hardly remember what he looked like." This was a lie, so she concentrated on her breathing, keeping it slow and even, and hoped his machine wouldn't pick up the rise in her heartbeat. Of course, she knew what he looked like, but she needed to convince the guard of her disinterest. "Have a good trip." When he turned away to question another passenger, she'd hurried on through the rocking carriages to find relief. Her heart was racing, her palms sweaty, and her nerve ends raw. It was worse than how she felt on her first day at school. After relieving herself, she crossed to the old crazed ceramic basins to wash her hands. The soot from the engine coated everything with a grey film. The disinfectant dispenser was empty. She shuddered and turned the tap handle with her elbow, rinsed and wiped her hands on her skirt. A check in the mirror showed her cornrow braids needed reworking. She had to wear her hair like this now. Stray hairs fell around her face, and there were smudges on her cheeks. Her grey eyes were red-rimmed from sleeping, or else the coal dust was making them sore. The smell of sulphur hung in the stale air. The cabin was warm and smelly, but she was reluctant to push her way back through the throng of passengers. She stood staring through the window and watched as the trails of white steam dashed past. Lit by the cabin lights, they broke into wisps and disappeared. This carriage was at the front of the train, close to the engine. Except for the rocking and clacking, you wouldn't know the train was moving. The black tunnel walls passed like the inside of a chimney, dense and dark, without a break in the monotony. Back in the passage, she weaved her way through the mass of bodies. A voice said, "Callista," and she turned her head instinctively and then realized her mistake. It was her father's voice. Up ahead, the guard was watching her. She needed to tell him where they were, but the guard was staring. She swung around, saw a child nearby. Before she looked at her father, recognized his face, longed to collapse into his arms. "I'll tell my mother on you if you pinch me again," Callista said to the child, trying to sound indignant, then added, "She's in cabin 16. She'll fix you." With her back still to the guard, she whispered, "Hello, Father. I love you." He smiled and then melted into the people around her. With her face screwed in anger, she rushed through the crowd toward the guard, hoping to have done enough to smother any suspicions he might have. Back in the cabin, she reached over to find her e-reader in their bag and whispered to Mother that she'd seen Father. The minutes pass, but he doesn't come. If only she'd been able to hug him. He looked gaunt and exhausted. He needed the food they had in the bag. Perhaps she could make another trip to the relief cabin. Would it look suspicious so soon after the first visit? Before she could decide, Mother excused herself and left the cabin, taking their bag with her. Callista hoped she saw Father on her way to the relief facilities. Mother returned a good while later, and without comment put the bag on the floor and picked up her knitting, which she left on the seat. She was knitting baby booties. They don't know what sex her child will be, but if she has one successfully, then she will be expected to have more. Mother had spun a hank of very fine yarn from a small bag of merino fleece. Sheep were scarce. They don't breed well in captivity. These booties may have to do for all of Callista's children. An hour later they arrived at Queenstown Station. She was blinded by the daylight as they got off the train. No wonder they had to pack sunglasses. At the end of the platform, through the iron-railed fence, she saw the sky, a beautiful blue. She hurried to the fence, dragging her mother with her. Mother laughed. "I remember my first glimpse," she said, running to keep up. They grasped the fence and peered through. The mountain range was reflected mirror image on the surface of the lake. So breathtaking, Callista held her breath and thought she imagined it. The snow on the Remarkables reflected the sun in a jagged band of blinding white against the sky, just like the postcards. She shut her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, but when she opened them the view was the same. It was not a mirage. It was a miracle. They turned at the sound of a shout, and a scurry of movement on the platform parted the crowd. Her father was being marched towards them between two guards. Callista clenched her fists and stiffened her arms to prevent herself from reaching out to touch him as he passed. They disappeared through a side door. She looked at her mother. She was staring ahead, tears streaming down her face, and Callista knew it was not the sunlight that hurt her mother's eyes. Father was wearing a coat from our bag. She had found him after all. Behind them the train began to move, and she turned to watch. A slow hiss from its pistons, followed by puffs of steam from its fat black funnel, and the huge wheels began to turn, as slow as the second hand on the kitchen clock, and then faster and faster. Number 586 gathered speed and left the station. Callista had read the train circle the lake to come back to this station before returning northward with a new load of passengers. In a month they'd ride it again. She would have had her course of vitamin D and would face a future of insemination and motherhood. There was no choice. Breeders were precious. Lineage was important, and although her father was about to be cast in the nuclear waste, her mother's genes and his were a good mix. Callista was fit and healthy without any inherited diseases. The authorities would overlook her father's religious insanity for the sake of more healthy children. But she knew they would watch her in case she went the same way. Her father would never know his grandchildren. She may never see him again. Callista cursed the Carbonites and their crazy fixation. And that was Chapter 1 of The Carbonite's Daughter by Deryn Pittar. A really cool build-up from a YA dystopian novel. The beginning, I really like, particularly in the beginning, that as you first begin to read, you might be forgiven for mistaking this as just a standard YA novel set in modern-day New Zealand where nothing else is wrong and they're just catching a train from one place to another. But as the story unfolds, so too does the history of the world and a bit of the background, and your expectations begin to shift. And I really like the journey that this book takes you on, even in those first few pages. Really changes your expectations and your predictions for the future of the book. Quite a lot, quite a shift into dystopian there. Very, very cool. Thank you once again to Deryn Pittar for allowing me to read this book. In the description there will be links to where you can purchase this book and also to Deryn Pittar's social media. And also I would like to thank IFWG Publishing Australia, who published this book, for their permission as well to read the book online. I'll post a link to their website where you can look at other books that they publish. And thank you once again to them. And a reminder again that Deryn is a Aotearoa author. Get out there and support Aotearoa authors. Go by The Carbonite's Daughter and look at some of the other work as well. I highly encourage you to get out there. And as always, thank you very much for watching and listening. Please do leave a like on the video and subscribe if you want to see more of this content. If you have any suggestions, put them down in the comments below. If you want to talk about The Carbonite's Daughter, have you read The Carbonite's Daughter and you have any opinions to give, throw them down in the comments down below. Ring the bell, and thank you very much. I will see you all tomorrow.